Our world is full of mysteries and enigmas that can sometimes be difficult to unravel. Danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, even where we least anticipate it. This story is a vivid example of how everyday events can turn into a real nightmare for some people. Excessive trustfulness is not always a good thing, as it can prevent one from realistically assessing risks and lead to fatal consequences. This is exactly what happened to our heroine, who paid too high a price for her carelessness. Claire Bernal was born on July 25, 1983, in the small picturesque town of Tunbridge Wells in Kent, United Kingdom. This cozy settlement is located just a few hours' drive from bustling London. Therefore, Claire, like her mother, loved to visit here from time to time for shopping, especially on weekends when they could spend quality time together. Claire's mother, Patricia, worked as a cook, while the girl's father, Martin, was involved in finance and business, holding a managerial position in one of the organizations. The family was quite affluent. In addition to Claire, the couple had two more sons, James and Philip. Claire was the middle child in the family. She grew up to be a calm and gentle girl who knew how to smooth over conflicts and maintain peace in the family. However, even her efforts could not save her parents' marriage, which began to fall apart over time. When Claire was still in elementary school, Patricia and Martin decided to divorce. Despite the fact that her parents separated and lived apart, the girl managed to maintain close relationships with both of them. From childhood, Claire was distinguished by a creative and artistic character, was cheerful, kind, trusting, and polite. At the age of 12, she became seriously interested in the beauty industry and began experimenting with makeup. So it's not surprising that as soon as the opportunity to get a job arose, she chose a local cosmetics store. In fact, Claire felt a little insecure, and makeup became a way for her to mask her own flaws. By the age of 18, our heroine had grown up, become more confident in herself, and already had a pretty good understanding of makeup. Although she was self-taught, she managed to develop her own style and worked wonderfully on the looks of her friends, experimenting on them and herself with cosmetic products. Claire decided to enroll at West Kent College in Tunbridge for a degree in beauty art. At the same time, she helped her father in his business, mastering the basics of entrepreneurship. In 2001, the girl successfully completed her studies, receiving a diploma. By that time, she had already formed certain plans for the future. Claire dreamed of doing professional stage makeup and working on movie sets and in theaters. In 2003, she realized that it was time for a career change. Claire began sending out resumes to large cosmetic stores, hoping to get a manager position and expand her experience in this field. She took the initiative into her own hands, collected the contacts of her favorite brands and approached their management directly. Soon she was invited for an interview at the prestigious Harvey Nichols store in the Knightsbridge area, in the department of the luxurious skincare brand La Prairie. This was one of the most famous points of sale for luxury cosmetics in London. Working there was a real dream for Claire. The girl persuaded her friend to accompany her to the interview. The interview went surprisingly easily, and Claire effortlessly got the coveted job. This success radically changed her life. At the age of 21, she moved closer to the capital and began her career. Claire spent the first half of the day at work with the other girls, and afterwards enjoyed communicating with friends. She became especially close with two young colleagues, Susan and Natalie. To save on rent, the friends decided to rent an apartment for 3. Their apartment was about a 40-minute drive from the store. However, Claire felt almost at home there. The town strongly resembled her hometown where she grew up. As for her personal life, Claire was not looking for a serious relationship. From time to time, she dated nice guys, but it usually didn't go beyond light flirting. The girl was extremely picky when choosing a permanent partner. In 2004, her attention was drawn to a new security guard at Harvey Nichols named Michael Pech. He was a former military man of Slovak origin. Before moving to London in 2003, Michael worked at the American Embassy in Bratislava and ended up in Britain on a student visa. When Slovakia joined the EU, he no longer had to worry about documents, he acquired the right to move freely and stay in the country indefinitely. Michael joined the security team at Harvey Nichols in 2004, which is when he met Claire. At first, their communication was purely friendly, but by the end of January 2005, the young man began to show his sympathy more actively, and a romantic relationship developed between them. At that time, Michael was just in the process of divorcing his wife, who remained living in Slovakia. Claire decided to give these relations a chance, although she had some doubts. She shared with her mother the news about the appearance of a new boyfriend in her life. Michael was 8 years older than Claire, so the girl was not completely sure if she was ready to tie her life to such a mature man, despite the fact that they got along well. However, the 30-year-old Michael seemed to have serious intentions about building a family life with Claire. The girl hesitated, because deep down she was not yet ready for something so serious. But Michael turned out to be extremely persistent and continued to push her. Michael's obsession with Claire became apparent right after their first date. He even managed to confess his love to her. Claire was shocked by such a rapid development of events and was at a loss, not knowing what to say. Over the next 3 weeks, the girl became increasingly uncomfortable due to Michael's excessive jealousy and his desire to control her every move. And this was despite the fact that they had only met 3 times. Michael wanted Claire to spend all her time exclusively with him. He demanded that she stop communicating with friends and even family. The girl tried in every possible way to get rid of the obsessive suitor. She finally decided to break off the relationship when Michael, returning to London from Slovakia, demanded that she meet him at the airport. Claire did come, but when they returned to her apartment, Michael announced that he wanted to stay the night. The girl was categorically against it, but he did not even think of going anywhere. After a short argument, Michael still left. The news of the breakup was a real blow to him. Michael expected that Claire would change her mind and return to him. He called her 20 times in a row. Claire did not answer. She shouted to him through the window to leave her alone, but Michael did not leave the house for about 2 hours. One of Claire's neighbors tried to persuade him to leave, to which he reacted with threats and a demand not to interfere. Finally, he got tired of waiting and left. But the very next day, Michael appeared at Claire's apartment again, this time with a bouquet of flowers. The man was waiting for the girl, hoping for her return home, but Claire did not even want to see him. She was horrified to realize that now she would have to constantly face him at work. And so it happened. Claire carefully avoided any contact with Michael, and he, in turn, used every opportunity to be near her and see her as often as possible. Michael followed Claire everywhere in the store. The girl constantly felt his piercing gaze on her. Then the man decided to act more decisively. He repeatedly approached Claire and begged her to renew their relationship. Michael assured that he loved her and claimed that she also loved him. In response, the girl only shook her head in denial. Then Michael began to ask her colleagues to influence Claire to agree to talk to him. This finally infuriated the girl. She firmly asked Michael to leave her alone, but her refusal only worsened the situation. Once, after the end of the work shift, when Claire was leaving the store, Michael grabbed her hand and again began to talk about his love. The girl was silent. Then the man began to shout louder and louder, attracting the attention of everyone around and talking about his feelings. Finally, Claire could not stand it and replied that she did not love him, after which she left. During a meeting with her mother, she showed her a photo of Michael. Patricia immediately noticed something strange in his eyes. The woman expressed concern that this man was not the best choice for her daughter. But Claire assured her mother that she had already broken off relations with Michael. The girl had very little experience communicating with the opposite sex, so she decided to wait with the choice of a permanent partner. Patricia sighed with relief, deciding that this strange suitor had finally left her daughter alone. In April 2005, Claire, together with Susan and Natalie, tired of Michael's obsession, moved to a new apartment in Dulwich, which was much closer to their work. The girl even changed her phone number. Shortly after her 22nd birthday, Claire went on a 5-day trip to Italy with her mother. It was during this period that the girl met a new guy with whom she began a romantic relationship. Claire was enchanted by her chosen one and shared with her closest friends that she seemed to have finally met the one with whom she was ready to tie her life. It seemed that everything had finally settled down, and no one could even think what a tragic turn this story would take ahead. On Tuesday, September 13, 2005, 22-year-old Claire agreed to swap shifts with one of her colleagues. By 7:50 p.m., most of the store's visitors had already left. The working day was coming to an end. There were only about 10 minutes left before closing. Claire suddenly happily said goodbye to some of the employees who were already leaving for home. The rest were putting things in order at their workplaces. Our heroine was standing at the administrator's counter. She needed to stay a little longer to close everything before leaving. Claire and her colleague Victoria exchanged smiles. But suddenly their carefree faces changed to anxious ones. Something incomprehensible was happening in the store. There was a commotion, people were fussily running in different directions. Victoria's ears caught screams that were drowned out only by the sounds of gunshots. The situation got out of control. Visitors were leaving the store in a panic. No one understood what was happening. Within minutes, police from the nearest station in West London arrived at the scene. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they were greeted by a picture of complete chaos. Several eyewitnesses claimed that possibly 2 people died as a result of the shooting. The officers carefully made their way along the street, holding their weapons at the ready, and entered the Harvey Nichols store. There, on the floor near the administrator's counter, lay the bloodied body of a girl. Her face was disfigured by several bullets, a whole pool of blood formed under the body, which made it almost impossible to identify her. Nearby lay the body of a man, also lifeless. From the position of the body and the gun in his hand, it could be concluded that he had taken his own life. As it turned out, the deceased was Michael Pech, who had previously worked as a security guard in this store. He was easily identified, but it was much more difficult to establish the identity of the girl due to serious injuries to her face and head. As for Michael, at first it remained unclear where he got the weapon from and why he dealt with the girl. He shot her point blank, aiming at her face. The victim was badly mutilated, but colleagues were able to recognize her as Claire Bernal. Even without a forensic medical examination, it was obvious that Claire was shot 4 times. The first bullet hit her back, the rest were fired by the attacker into the girl's face. Forensic experts began collecting evidence and examining the crime scene, while at the same time communicating with many witnesses. The head of the store's security service approached the officers and offered to view the files on his computer. The man said that he had carefully analyzed Michael's behavior after a series of incidents in which he was involved. The files contained alarming information about this person, but the police officers decided not to rush to conclusions, but to conduct their own investigation first. The investigation immediately encountered obstacles. The store management insisted on resuming work the very next morning, since the downtime of the establishment led to financial losses every minute. The police rejected this request, insisting on the need for a thorough investigation. It was necessary to collect evidence, recreate the events, and most importantly, find all the bullets and cartridges fired from Michael's weapon. The store was missing 6 rounds, but despite all efforts, the police never found the 6th bullet. According to the store employees, the former security guard could have known Claire's work schedule. However, he was unlikely to know that she had swapped shifts with a friend. Therefore, it was suggested that he first went to her home, where she lived with other girls. Comparing the fact that a much larger number of bullets were missing from the gun than were found at the crime scene, the officers came to a chilling conclusion. It is quite possible that the fatal 6th bullet was fired elsewhere. When the police arrived at Claire's rented apartment, the house was quiet. The doors were locked. Detectives suggested that Michael could have gotten inside through a window. However, the question arose whether it was worth breaking down the door. They found no signs of breaking and entering. Suddenly, the attention of law enforcement officers was attracted by a local resident who was anxiously walking near the house. She was asked a few questions, hoping that the girl might have noticed something suspicious. It turned out that this was the neighbor of the deceased, named Natalie. She could not get into the apartment, because she was waiting for a friend who had the keys. Of course, she was waiting for Claire Bernal. The news of the murder shocked the neighbor. She immediately suggested that only Michael Pech could have attacked the victim, and pointed to his suspicious behavior on the eve of the incident. The girl said that Claire had only dated the security guard 3 times. The couple broke up quickly, but later she often saw the man near their house. He behaved obsessively and constantly tried to meet with his ex-girlfriend. He demanded to resume the relationship, confessed his love. Natalie described Michael as a very toxic and manipulative person who sought to completely control Claire. But she refused to date him further, after which he began a real persecution. Regarding Susan, Natalie reported that she could not have become a victim of Michael, since she had been outside the city for several days. Although this was a certain relief, the question of the 6th bullet remained open. The police continued to gather information. They were convinced that the desperate security guard could have shot 2 people before taking his own life. Natalie, and subsequently Claire's entire inner circle, spoke in detail about the inadequate behavior of the former admirer. He called Claire every day, waited on the street, looked for any reason to meet. Judging by his actions, Michael believed that their relationship was continuing, and the breakup was just a temporary quarrel. The man constantly confessed his love to the girl, considered them a couple. According to the neighbors, it looked creepy. According to Natalie, the friend's move was connected precisely with Michael. They hoped that this way the persecution would stop, but he tracked them down again. Subsequently, due to the security guard's inadequate behavior, the store management simply fired him. The girls found out that the stalker had been arrested and was under investigation, so they calmed down, thinking that he was behind bars. It was not difficult for the detectives to find out Michael's address. He lived half an hour's drive from there. The area where his home was located had a bad reputation. It is quite possible that criminal elements operated there. It seemed that there was someone in the house. Although the police arrived without warning, they decided to talk to new potential witnesses. Law enforcement officers hoped to find out where Michael could have gotten the weapon. In the dwelling, the officers found 7 men at once. All of them were immigrants from Eastern Europe and did not speak English. Only one short guy named York, a Pole by nationality, knew the language well enough to express his opinion and understand what the law enforcement officials wanted from him. According to him, all the residents of the house arrived here on work visas and are engaged in construction and trade. The document check did not reveal anything illegal. Michael was the 8th roommate. At first glance, he made the impression of a kind and very sensitive person, although somewhat secretive. He usually kept to himself in his room and rarely interacted with his neighbors. This lasted until he began to have uncontrollable outbursts of aggression. Of course, in the end he moved out from there. But despite this, all these people were shocked by the news of the murder, because they would never have thought that he was capable of such a thing. After talking with the guard's former neighbors, the detectives concluded that he was acting alone. At least none of these families of migrant workers were involved in the crime. Finally, on Wednesday, September 14th, the 6th bullet was found in the store. It was stuck in the ceiling. At the same time, the police questioned all of Claire's colleagues, trying to gather as much information as possible about the criminal and the victim. They said that after the breakup, Michael's behavior became so inadequate that they eventually turned to the organization's management with a request to fire him. The man was even banned from entering the store premises. At first, he lied to everyone that he had dumped Claire himself, and then allegedly changed his mind and decided to renew the relationship. Only later it became clear that this was not true. Victoria, who witnessed the massacre, said that Claire never realized what had happened. They exchanged glances shortly before the end of the shift. Suddenly, the girl noticed a dark figure flashing behind Claire's back. At some point, it occurred to Victoria that perhaps it was Claire's new boyfriend who wanted to surprise her, but then she saw a gun in his hands. A shot rang out, and Claire fell to the floor. Victoria saw the attacker get down on one knee and fire a few more shots. The horrified witness to the massacre rushed to escape. She heard 2 more shots behind her. When the girl instinctively looked over her shoulder, the shooter was no longer visible. Probably at that moment Michael took his own life. Several witnesses gave a detailed description of the events. Their testimonies confirmed Victoria's story. It turned out that the 6th bullet disappeared because Michael's first attempt to shoot himself in the head was unsuccessful. The bullet missed and hit the ceiling. And the next shot was already fatal. The guard shot himself in the head and died on the spot. The detectives managed to establish the address of the apartment where Michael had been living recently. However, they could not find any clues there about where he got the weapon and whether he had an accomplice. York handed over to the police a 40-page manuscript that he had found in the room of his former roommate. Michael kept notes in English and Slovak. It became clear that he had been following his ex-girlfriend for a long time. The address of her new apartment, where she moved with her friends, was even indicated here. Michael was constantly watching Claire's every move. Apparently, the stalker really had strong feelings for his victim. He even dedicated poems to her in 2 languages. However, judging by everything, Michael lived in some kind of imaginary world, where Claire was his only true love. But when he found out about the girl's new boyfriend, he realized that it would not be possible to restore the relationship. Probably it was then that a plan to end Claire's life and then his own matured in his head. The girl received only 1 bullet in the back. All the other bullets were intended for her face. Michael was obviously filled with rage and wanted to destroy the beauty of his victim. Experts found a high concentration of prohibited substances in the killer's blood, 2.5 times higher than the life-threatening level. It remained unclear whether he was an inveterate drug addict and was used to such a dosage, or whether he had specifically taken in order to gather the courage to commit the crime, but overdid it with the dose. Everyone who was familiar with the details of this story characterized the killer as an excessively obsessive and unbalanced personality. These traits were especially vividly manifested in his relationship with Claire. The girl had to make considerable efforts to break off relations with him, but even after that, the persecution did not stop, but turned into a creepy stalking. Michael followed her every day, even after being fired from work. He stalked her in the subway, made 50 calls a day and bombarded her with messages. Despite the fact that Claire tried to ignore such behavior for as long as possible, Michael simply did not accept refusal. When the girl continued to ignore him, the tone of the messages changed from declarations of love to threats of murder. In one of them he wrote, "I will take my own life if we cannot be together. If I can't be with you, then no one can." Claire was horrified by the situation. She hated her job and was afraid to go there. The girl lost the ability to concentrate and was constantly late. She even began to think about changing her place of work. In addition, her health was severely shaken due to constant stress. Claire was tormented by insomnia. She had several eye infections. One of the most terrifying incidents occurred on March 26. Claire was returning from work on the subway, and Michael was sitting right across from her the whole way, demanding attention. The girl tried to ignore him, but it did not help. She got off at one of the stations, hoping to change to another train. Michael pushed her on the platform, and then caught up with her and sat across from her again. Here Claire could not stand it, burst into tears and said that she would go to the police if he did not stop the persecution. To which Michael replied that she would die if she dared to complain about him. Then Claire changed her tactics and said that she would not inform the police if he left her alone. It seemed to work. Despite the fact that the guard went berserk and shouted at the whole carriage, at the next station he just got off. Against the backdrop of this persecution, the nerves of our heroine were on edge. At that very moment, she had a panic attack. Claire understood that this was unlikely to stop Michael. She turned to her mother for advice. The woman recommended getting a restraining order. As a result, Claire did file a complaint against her stalker, but a little later, because she had already begun to suffer from real paranoia. Michael was detained, he was even tested by a psychiatrist. But the doctor decided that the man was mentally healthy, so he was released without any charges. Michael managed to deceive everyone. He blamed Claire herself for everything that happened. He was simply warned that he would be arrested if he continued to communicate with this girl. Upon learning about the release of her ex-boyfriend, Claire decided to move in with her friends. It is difficult to describe her surprise and horror when, the day after the move, when the girls were unpacking things in the new apartment, Claire saw Michael in the window. He just stood and looked at them, waving his hand in a friendly way. Claire called the police, but by the time law enforcement arrived, he had already fled. Everything repeated the next day. At that time, the girl found out that Michael had asked one of his colleagues about the maximum term of punishment for murder in the UK. Realizing the real danger, she again turned to the police. This time the perpetrator was detained in time. It seemed that the arrest did not bother him at all. He even raised his handcuffed hands so that the girl could see them in the window, and at the same time he smiled in a friendly way. Michael was charged with harassment and threats of murder, but 8 days later he was released on bail again. He was released until the end of August, when the hearings were to take place. He went to ground and did not appear for several months, which allowed Claire to calm down a little. Michael's trial took place on August 31, 2005. At first, he denied his guilt, but at the last moment, the lawyer convinced him to confess to the persecution. This made it possible to drop the charges of threatening murder and reduce the maximum term of punishment to 6 months. At the same time, the probability of a suspended sentence and community service increased significantly. Claire was even glad that she would not have to meet her stalker in the courtroom. The stalker was indeed sentenced to several months of community service. The court decided that Michael belonged to a low-risk group and did not pose a serious danger. At that time, he had not persecuted Claire for more than 4 months. The girl calmed down and returned to a normal life. She was even against Michael being imprisoned again, not wanting to harm him. But as it later turned out, in fact, all this time he was preparing for the massacre and went to his homeland for this. On June 8, 2005, Michael applied for the purchase of a firearm and signed up for target shooting courses. To obtain a pistol, it was necessary to provide a certificate from a doctor, as well as undergo a background check. Michael was not in the local police databases, they did not have information about his persecution, and he had no previous convictions in his homeland. The doctor certified that the man was mentally healthy. Taking advantage of these gaps, Michael received a gun permit on June 14. The criminal immediately went to the store and legally purchased a compact 9mm semi-automatic pistol. On August 11, he transported this weapon in the luggage of a bus from Slovakia to Great Britain. Despite the fact that at that time Michael was under investigation, he managed to slip through unnoticed with his pistol. Now it remained only to wait for the court hearings scheduled for August 31. Until that time, the criminal went to ground. It turns out that Claire had an interview scheduled for Friday, September 16. Finally, the girl was supposed to get the position of administrator in the company of her dreams. At that time, she was already in a relationship with another young man, but she decided not to tell him about her stalker so as not to burden her beloved with unnecessary worries. The court's decision was most shocking. Thanks to a deal with the investigation, Michael managed to avoid the maximum punishment of 5 years in prison for threats of murder. He skillfully pretended to be an adequate person, so he fell into the category of low-risk offenders. In the end, all these happy coincidences for him and the tricks he used allowed Michael to avoid full responsibility for his actions. During an internal investigation, it was possible to identify a whole series of mistakes made by the authorities, including the fact that Michael's name was not included in the lists of potentially dangerous criminals. Even after the incidents in the subway car, Claire's friends suspected that Michael posed a much more serious threat than she imagined. That is why Natalie turned to the head of security at the cosmetics store. The man became interested in her statement and began to carefully view the recordings from CCTV cameras. Very soon it became clear to him that Michael was literally following the girl, stalking her, harassing her. For the most part, he did this secretly, watching her not directly, but through mirrors. After that, Michael was transferred to another department of the store so that he would not intersect with the object of his persecution, but this did not help. The man continued to hang around Claire's workplace. Such behavior had a very negative effect on the girl. She often caught his gaze when she passed by the mirrors. It was oppressive, frightening, and led to paranoid moods and even panic attacks. Thanks to the fact that the head of the security service turned to the police, Michael was summoned to the management and fired 2 days later. Probably, this angered him even more. However, the head of security did not stop there. He interviewed all the employees of the store. In his opinion, Michael planned to kill Claire back in March, but then he could not implement his plan. From the very beginning it was obvious that this was an unhealthy attitude, but not for Claire herself. The girl turned out to be so naive that it cost her her life. The victim's relatives filed a lawsuit, accusing the London authorities of negligence. However, as is often the case, the police officers were acquitted, recognizing their work as professional. And due to the absence of problems with the law, no one believed that Michael was really dangerous. According to the court, the police could not prevent Claire's death and acted exclusively within the framework of the law. Without achieving justice, Claire's mother launched her own campaign. She enlisted the support of other women who lost their daughters or suffered from stalkers and the inaction of the authorities. All this provoked the strengthening of legislation and punishments for the persecution of women. Currently, the maximum term of imprisonment for such crimes is 10 years. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Until next time, friends.